Awesome.
What's up, everybody? It's the Scotty P podcast, and I'm here with Jimmy House.
What's up, everybody?
You guys are good. You guys are good. That's all good. We're here at Henzo Gracie, Austin. I appreciate you
Yeah,
hosting us.
absolutely.
And yeah, man, I'm excited to have you on the podcast. You
Thank
do a
you.
lot. I see a lot on social media. Instagram seems to be where you're like mega popular. I'm guessing you have a successful YouTube channel as well.
It's building. It's building. My YouTube / best friend little brother is over there hanging out, probably working on YouTube right now. So it's building for sure. But the Instagram's the main thing for sure.
Hell yeah. And so just from what I see, I'll tell the audience what I know about, and then I'll give you a chance to kind of explain your background and your journey. But yeah, you first came on my radar as a black belt that used to wrestle and does like crazy lifts. So I've seen you deadlift 700 pounds, like just insane numbers I didn't even think were possible. And then yeah, man. So and you just did your WWE or pro wrestling match.
Yep.
But yeah, just for the audience, kind of give your background.
Yeah, so I'm a Brazilian Jiu Jitsu black belt out of Phoenix, Arizona. I've also acquired my pro card in natural bodybuilding, as well as obtained an elite level in drug-free powerlifting. Along with that too, again, born and raised in Phoenix, but also just moved to Austin here this past April, and now just pursuing a lot of different things. But my main focus right now is the pro wrestling.
And you just had your first pro wrestling match?
Yeah, about a month ago, I had my first pro wrestling match. If you guys watch WWE, you probably know who Goldust is. Dustin Rhodes, who's now with AEW, is my coach. He's the person I'm training under. So I just had my first match under him about a month ago.
Dang, that's awesome.
Yeah.
What was that experience like?
You know, I had trained pro wrestling for about 3 months back in Arizona, and then I had that major knee injury that we'll talk about later. So I took about 8 months out of the ring and out of to the jiu-jitsu mats and everything just to get that rehab back to where I could actually be athletic again. But after I moved here, one of my good friends that's with AEW right now, his name is Brian Cage. He's on their active roster. He had told me that Dustin has a school up in Leander, which is like northern Austin, and they said they were taking in like new people for like their camps that they kind of do every 3 months or so. And so the first spot that they had open, I applied for it and thankfully got in, and then went through that whole process. And then now I'm actively training underneath Dustin and the coaches there to now continue to build my pro wrestling resume.
Awesome. And is that like the vision you have for yourself for the future?
Yeah. So ultimately my goal is to be a superhero to millions of kids. So for me in particular, the goal within that is to be able to build or expand upon a platform that allows for that. And for me, if I'm looking at how my life comes full circle, I had started watching pro wrestling when I was 3. Bill Goldberg's my hero. So now being at an age to where it's actually athletically possible for me to do something like that, it makes sense to strive for that goal, that superhero type goal, be the Goldberg to a kid that he was for me within something like pro wrestling, because I didn't necessarily grow up thinking I was going to be a pro wrestler, but as time has gone on and I've attained a bunch of different skill sets within lifting and jiu-jitsu and whatnot, it makes more and more sense. And I actually really like pro wrestling because to me, it allows me to demonstrate all my skill sets as opposed to just the grappling or just the strength or even just the aesthetic. So it's kind of like everything in one.
Yeah, man. There's so much to dive into. So I used to watch wrestling as a kid. So man, I totally get that.
Oh yeah.
I love how you have essentially, man, it's not like you want to be a WWE wrestler for the sake of being a wrestler. It's like you have something that is much high, what would you call it? A virtue much higher than that. And man, that's definitely a way to lead by.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah. Bill Goldberg, my childhood hero. A lot of times when he talks about how getting into the business for him was to set an example for his son. And even before his son was born was just to be a superhero and a hero to millions of kids. He did a lot of work for like Make-A-Wish and stuff like that. And even as a kid growing up, when I was watching him in particular, I was one of those kids that had a huge impact from just seeing how he was as a human being, how he was as a champion within the ring. And before you even realize what, the choreography behind pro wrestling is, as a kid, you're very impressionable. So you start to believe everything that you see. And Goldberg was, in my opinion, the best person at the time to look up to in regards to the total encapsulation of what a man should be. And so my entire life up until this point, that's basically everything I've tried to work for in regards to my physique or my athletic endeavors. And now moving forward, pro wrestling, as you said, wasn't necessarily like this dying passion that I had as a kid. I enjoyed watching it when Goldberg was there, but I didn't necessarily grow up with this idea that I was going to be a pro wrestler. But as time went on, I started to kind of see and like, I think I can do this. I think I can do this. And as I started to formulate more specific goals for myself long term, it became the obvious pick.
Yeah, yeah, man. And you're saying how pro wrestling can be it's like the perfect combination of all these skill sets you have. Well, my stepdad is a wrestling fanatic. He knows. He actually mentioned AEW to me.
Oh, that's awesome.
Today, and I was like, well, I don't even know what that is. And
AEW would be like the main competitor to WWE. You could compare it to like Bellator to UFC, kind of. But I would say like AEW is gaining a lot more popularity now, though. To be honest, yeah.
So, but he listens to wrestling podcasts. He wants to do his own. Like, he's really into it. And one day, so I used to watch it when I was little, but then I got out of it. And I came back to visit my parents. They live up in north of Dallas, so it's like a 5-hour drive. And their thing is to sit down and eat and put on TV. And,
nice.
They're watching pro wrestling, and I was watching it with them. And I was just like watching it. I was like, oh, I don't want to watch wrestling. I was like, well, whatever.
Yeah.
So we're watching it, and I was just like, man, this is what we do in Jiu Jitsu, but way more entertaining to watch. I was like, they're doing all my best moves all in succession.
Right. Yeah.
It's like I might be able to do like 2 or 3 of those, but they're doing all the best ones. It looks good.
Yep.
And I was like, I totally get it. It's like a Jiu Jitsu match can be really boring. Right. I'll watch it, I do breakdowns of high level Jiu Jitsu matches. Dude, I'll watch a 20-minute match and then not get anything that I can really pull from it, hand fighting, it's just all, you can just say it's a little monotonous. But the wrestling, man, it's like you're seeing the coolest stuff choreographed. It's still, very much real, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they're getting hurt, they're hitting each other. And so, yeah, it really like synced to me. I was like, you know what? I'm not going to hate on wrestling anymore because I get why people watch it.
Yeah, I always tell people, especially people that are new to it, it's just really dependent upon what lens you're watching it through. So, for example, a lot of times I think the initial mistake for most people is that they approach pro wrestling and they watch it through like a UFC lens. They're expecting to see something more UFC oriented because, you see 2 guys going at it and you just automatically think that they should be actually fighting. And then so when you get less of that per se, then that's where some of the disdain or whatnot comes towards the sport. However, when you watch it through a lens of like, this is basically a live action movie, like I had it compared to the other day as like any typical superhero film in regards to how it's set up, the moves sometimes, like it's very similar. And so what a lot of people don't appreciate is the ability to commit to all that real time, a lot of times with very little planning, just through how skillful these guys are through obviously their charisma, their athleticism, and just their ability to paint a story within a match. That's something that not even myself have a full understanding at being a beginner, but I can at least appreciate it because I see and I'm around the high level of people that have made it work and made it famous. So
yeah, The Rock was just on Joe Rogan. He was kind of talking a little bit about that.
He's the Gordon Ryan of charisma. That's what I told someone the other day. Yeah, he is.
And it's so crazy because he was the complete opposite, where the whole country hated him at one point.
Yeah,
man. That's crazy. So I'm gonna keep touching back on your story because there's just so much in it. But what would you pick as like your favorite superhero if you had to pick one?
I've always been a fan of Spider-Man, not even necessarily because I feel like I resonate with him by any means. Just earlier as a kid, those are my favorite movies watching growing up. So I just always like Spider-Man a little bit more than the others. Although a lot of the recent Avenger movies and whatnot, I definitely think are entertaining for sure. But like original Tobey Maguire was my childhood personally.
Yeah. No, we went and saw it on opening day. So my family is huge on superheroes. We all go watch the movies together. We talk about which ones we like, and we have my stepdad, Brian, he's got an entire closet full of comics. So,
That's awesome. My dad was the same way.
Yeah. So then we kind of like touched base on that you had an injury, and I watched that on Instagram, and that's when it was like really opened my mind. Like, this dude is next level because that knee injury was insane. I saw something came out of your kneecap. It looked like when it happened, and
something popped for sure. Yeah,
and it was like your knee was like bent and you fell backwards on it almost off a takedown.
Yeah, super freak injury. One of my best friends back home, one of my best training partners to this day, Austin Baker. He owns Soul BJJ in Phoenix. If you guys are in Phoenix, make sure to check him out. But we were training for No-Gi Worlds at the time. He was about 2 weeks out, or about 2 weeks out or something like that. We were training every day, basically live 10-minute rounds from the feet, and everything was totally fine. I was better than ever. He was really clicking. And it's funny because I've had a handful of injuries in jiu-jitsu, and naturally they would always be on the last round because you'd assume that you stop rolling after you get injured. But like in my experience, is when somebody like literally says like last round, like, is it like you want to do one more round, like, yeah, sure, and then it happens, versus like I could have stopped right there. And so long story not so short, he had set up a really nice judo takedown. And I'm not familiar with the exact terminology. I had heard somebody refer to it as a tanatoshi, I believe. And anyways, he had got all my weight planted on my lead leg. And in my opinion, with the height discrepancy, him coming from about like 6'3", coming down to my 5'8.5", he was obviously aiming for my ankle to get behind it and trip me backwards. But during that process, he did come into the side of my knee. And so he's about 270 pounds. At the time, I was about 200.
Dang.
And so upon impact, I did feel one or two ligaments pop while we were still in the air. And then I ended up going with his momentum and kind of turning away from it to try to mitigate some of the pressure. But then, and this is where I also go into a tangent about mobility, but my internal hip rotation allowed me to absorb some of that impact until we hit the ground officially, where his body weight in correlation with the momentum coming down from mine hit the mat. And then that's where my MCL tore in 3 places. So in totality, I'm sorry, it was a full PCL tear, a partial ACL tear, 3 partial MCL tears, and a slight fractured femur, all in the same like instance.
Dang.
Yeah. And so basically from that, initially, if you watch the video, there's screaming, cussing, and a bunch of different things going on in my head. And the biggest thing that I thought in the moment was that was the knee injury that everyone talks about in regards to like, NFL players get that one ACL tear and they're done. And that was my main fear at the time, because that's when I really started formulating a lot of these bigger goals for myself that obviously rely on my body of work. And so I had tore my best friend's ACL accidentally off of a double leg takedown. It was like a very slight, like I tried to cut him down to the mat. His foot got caught in the mat, and like I heard 2 distinct pops, and he was down and he couldn't get himself back up. So naturally after this instance, I thought for sure I was not going to be able to stand myself up to my feet. But after a few moments of screaming and freaking out, he had stood me up to my feet, and then I went to go put weight on it. And then by the grace of God, I was still able to actually like balance on it, stabilize, like it wasn't like collapsing, which I found to be very interesting. And so going through that night, I was able to actually make it up the stairs by myself. But then obviously the days after that is when things started to get a little bit more complicated. I had to start that rehab process, which effectively took about like 6 to 7 months for me to get like fully back. Now, this is where I go into like the importance of mobility training and strengthening joints and ligaments and muscles through a full range of motion, and the benefits of that, because my biggest belief within all this is that had I not changed my style of training for the year and a half leading up to that moment, the repercussions from that instance probably would have been much worse, in my opinion. Even going down to, some of the internal hip rotation that I had been working on leading up to that. Had I not been working on that, at a certain point, my knee would have stopped turning in. Therefore, his weight would have kept coming through, and there would have been all this room between the ground and I before like we actually hit. So that could have been a much more catastrophic injury had I not even built the mobility to absorb that impact and turn with it as far as I did. So anyways, the main premise behind all this is that that's a huge reason why now I become such a big proponent outside of my traditional strength training and the mobility and strengthening stuff. Because of that injury right there, it was a very humble reminder that a lot of that stuff has validity to it. So now at this point, I've become more so obsessed with it and tried my best to pass it on to a lot of the people I work with. So
yeah. So can you kind of explain the style that you had switched to? Like, so you're just incorporating more mobility, or?
Yeah. So great question. So basically, I started lifting when I was 5. So my dad had taught me a lot of great basics leading up. I went from 5 up until age 14, working out with my dad on the weekends, and it was just very basic, strength training and some bodybuilding training in there. And then when I started training myself when I was 15, that's when I kind of went through my own journey. For the majority of that, it was a combination of bodybuilding, and then after high school, got into actually competing in powerlifting. During my powerlifting years, besides whatever natural athleticism and mobility that I had from, say, the wrestling and such that I didn't necessarily like focus on it per se. So then as I continued to lift really heavy through a finite range of motion. Then I started to notice that certain parts of my body, like my hamstrings, my hips, my groin, were actually very tight, or as I like to call weak, and it was causing issues such as, you know, lower back flare-ups, or just preventing me to do certain things that I wanted to in jiu-jitsu. And after I kind of did my last little like bulk strength phase, I got up to 250. I realized that powerlifting wasn't as important to me as it once was. And I really wanted to dive down this like athletic mobility rabbit hole, because I knew that if I was going to become the athlete that I really want to be, that's really my main weak area that I have to focus on. And so to answer your question, the main adjustments to my training was I kept a lot of the strength stuff, but within my accessory movements, I try to find certain staple exercises that both allowed me to get stronger, put on muscle, but also simultaneously stretch muscles, so that throughout the load, it provides a stimulus that allows the body to actually mobilize itself a little bit faster than, say, just traditional passive stretching. So, you know, like a weighted deep lunge, or or like a weighted say like a full range of motion dip, just like very basic movements, but working to accomplish more range of motion within them. And then as I learned more and I got a little bit more mobile, then I could get a little bit more specific on what muscles I really wanted to target more. But at the beginning, it was just trying to get what I would consider to be true full range of motion of all the different lifts that I was already doing.
Right, man, that's intense. And do you know Matt Domney over at Artistry?
Yeah, do you know Derek?
Yeah, I know Derek as well. So I train with them.
Okay, yes, I think that's where I've heard of you even prior to this conversation, because Derek's a good friend of mine. I'm sorry. I actually just talked to him today. I was supposed to visit him next week.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, I roll with the big boys down there sometimes.
Cool.
And yeah, Matt Domney, I brought you up because we were talking about injuries and recovering, and you know, he was saying that he tore his pec twice and was able to make a full recovery.
Wow.
And get a PR like 3 months after tearing his pec. And then we had brought up your knee injury, and he said that you had kind of started doing the same thing, where essentially when you get injured, there's this idea that you're not supposed to move it and you're just supposed to rest it, but that it's actually the opposite is true, is that you need to immediately begin working it through the range of motion with as lightweight as it can handle, so that it can like build the confidence. And I saw that you kind of posted about that for the you tweaked your knee just slightly right before your lifting event. You were saying how you had to immediately get it back to its confidence.
Yeah, exactly. I like to just basically say that in order to add mobility, add strength, anything, even fix injuries, you just got to communicate to your body. And you do that through providing stimulus in a controlled environment. So for something like an injury, let's say I come out of a knee injury and I am limited to like this much range of motion, which is actually pretty accurate to what I was dealing with right out the injury. Well, if that's all I can really do, then that's like my starting point of what I have to work with. So, you know, day one coming out of the injury, laying off the side of my bed, just doing this. And although it kind of seems redundant, this actually does a good job of getting blood flow to the area, and just like kind of tells your body that like, hey, you actually need to now repair this, because I need you to do this again like you used to over time. And as soon as I was able to just do something as simple as walk backwards with the knee brace on, I took it upon myself to do so. It wasn't super easy, but the biggest thing, like you talked about, was just like basically giving your body a reason to get better, which is generally done through movement. Movement is all healing. That's what I like to think about when I'm talking about some of this stuff. And then as time goes on, the knee starts to get stronger, the muscle starts to come back, and then you start to be able to get yourself back into deeper ranges of motion. For myself, I would say it probably took about 3 to 4 months before I got full knee extension and knee flexion back. But every week I did notice substantial progress, and I was able to bear more load, and things got a little bit easier. And I would, again, like I said, by month 7 or so, that's when I started to feel like I could actually not only bend my leg fully, but be able to do things athletically again. Heck
yeah. Sweet, dude. I've gotten hurt a lot, especially in this past year or so, and I've been going harder and harder. So I just understand that's a part of the game. But yeah, putting the muscle back under, through the range of motion, as soon as that I can, has really been a game changer for me.
Awesome.
So I definitely recommend. Like, I just pulled my hip at the last Naga. Man, I won 3 in a row, and everyone was cheering for me. And I was in the finals against the guy whose coach I already beat. And yeah, on the last match I won, I pulled my hip, so
Damn. Okay.
I had to like back out of that last match. But
Right.
lucky for me, I'd already won a belt, so
There you go.
it wasn't a complete loss. But
That's awesome.
it's funny how you have it in your mind. I was like, oh, I'm gonna get 2 belts,
Right.
and the universe was like, yeah, slow down, buddy.
Right, for sure.
But yeah, so I want to touch base again on your original story. So you said that the pro wrestling was you coming up with like a way to culminate everything. So it's like, were you just already into like powerlifting and bodybuilding and jiu-jitsu and wrestling like just naturally, or what kind of like brought you to like all these things that make you a badass?
Well, no, thank you. I appreciate it. Well, it really just started mostly because I started lifting at the age of 5 with my dad. And I started martial arts, like karate at age 3. So I've always been pretty active and pretty around combat. And pro wrestling isn't necessarily like live combat, but it's a form of it, or it's a demonstration of it, you know?
Yeah.
And so as I went through my years, sports have always been a major variable in my life. And I would say as time went on, working.
You good? Will you take pictures and stuff?
Oh, yeah. I would say as time went on, more so leading into specifically now, you know, I very much pride myself in some of the athletic abilities that I've had for the majority of my life, because I've worked for that the majority of my life. Obviously, the strength application, the body of work through like bodybuilding and maintaining a low body fat, and also some of the more charismatic stuff that honestly hasn't come super naturally to me, but I've definitely improved on over the years. And pro wrestling is really the best way, at least my most favorite way, to be able to express all of that, to where, you know, I got 24 years of working towards something, and only until just recently I really depicted what I really want that to be, for the reasons stated earlier. And sometimes I feel like, you know, in powerlifting, it's a display of strength, not so much athleticism all the time, or even charisma or anything like that. You know, each sport kind of has its strength, and it doesn't necessarily depict all the other things, but pro wrestling does do a very good job of it. And honestly, for me, my main motivator is not very tall. So in comparison to like my competition, I got to provide every bonus possible to be able to make up for that. So that's where everything kind of comes into play. And even more recently, trying to get on a next level of flexibility is very much on my radar, because if I can be like super, super flexible and do all this stuff, then I could probably provide somewhat of a case to appeal to somebody in a major organization. So that's really where my goal and mindset's at with everything.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And it's funny, you're talking about charisma, how that's like a skill in of itself.
Yeah.
And if, you know, this is smart to think about for any athlete that's looking to come up, and I realize this as a purple belt, I realized, you know, I wanted to do jiu-jitsu more seriously and be competitive. And you realize that, you know, you need a community if you're going to want to do these things. You know, it's like, what's the point of winning if no one knows?
Right.
You know, what's the point of, or like, how are you supposed to gather sponsors if no one knows who you are, because you're angry training in a gym with a,
right.
with a chip on your shoulder?
Right. Yeah.
Right. And so it's like, it's funny how you do jiu-jitsu, you kind of get in that mindset of like head down, stay focused, stretch, do all these things that you have to do. But then at the end of the day, you're like, you know, no one's really seeing the work that you got to put in. So it kind of occurred to me as like, okay, I need to like spend more time talking to people. It's like, because these people generally, you know, they appreciate when someone like works hard and they put in the effort and they put themselves out there. But if you're always like with your head down, like in the corner, pacing back and forth, getting your mind right, you know, you're not, you don't have a personality for them to kind of connect with you on. And so I really started to work on that, where I was just more social and talk to those that were around me. And I realized like through doing that, I started to have a charisma or whatever. And it seems like that's something that you figured out as well.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I think it shows for yourself with how successful your YouTube and everything is. So kudos to you on that.
Thank you.
It's, for me, it definitely didn't come super naturally. I look at some of my earlier YouTube videos when I thought I was doing good. My little brother would like record it like, yeah, I was really good. Like, you didn't even stutter or anything. And I'm like, and I look at it now, it's just like very, very bad. Very not so good.
No stutter.
You know, but at the same time too, I could probably look at this hopefully in a year from now and be able to pinpoint certain things that I could do better and have improved on. And that's just kind of the fun of it. Even when I do podcasts like this, the biggest thing that I really listen for is, all right, tally up. How many times did I say, how many times did I say like, how many times did I say, you know, like all these little things that aren't necessarily relevant to what we're actually talking about. And over time, actually approaching it in that way has helped me a lot in my sentence fluency. But also, I think it's added to my charisma per se when speaking and my comfortability in front of a camera, because I just have more confidence in what I'm saying and how I'm saying it, which directly plays a role in pro wrestling. I remember we did, our first promo for my match. And long story short, my opponent, and this was real, by the way, he like choked me with my curl bar as I was doing a set. And it was actually very good practice going from YouTube to that, because although it's not exactly the same, a lot of the practice with stuff like this or YouTube did play a direct role into the promo that I did for that match. And for my first one, it wasn't terrible. So I mean, it's definitely something I can improve on, but I was very happy with how it turned out. And I had to credit a lot of that due to some of the in camera experience that I had with like YouTube and some of my own personal stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Man, it's so funny how like when you see these things, it seems like very easy. Like,
Right.
Joe Rogan, the GOAT, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would always think to myself, like, man, I could do a better job, or I could do, I
Right.
could do that.
Yeah.
And then as I've done my own podcast now, it's like there is a real skill to this. It's really
Yeah.
hard. I have to be present with the conversation while also having questions ready. I have to remember these questions that I have ready while also being aware and enough to conversation to like
Yeah.
know when to ask follow-on questions or be in the moment. And then I never know when the other person's going to stop talking. So I have to have like that
Right.
question like ready to go.
Yeah.
So like that. And I've caught myself judging Joe so many times about just like, well, why didn't he ask this? Or why didn't he ask that? And just having myself drop the ball so many times is like, I get it. This is having a conversation is a skill in of itself.
Mm-hmm.
And it also cracks me up watching other people do podcasts and seeing how fluent they are with their words.
Yeah.
No likes, no ums. Everything they say like means something. They're not giving a bunch of filler words or side stories. And it was like, man, there is so much more that I can improve on just the speaking aspect.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let alone the cameras, the audio, and all that other stuff, right?
That's the whole thing too. I'm trying to figure that out myself. So, yeah.
We kind of covered your backstory and everything, and now you're starting to create like this, whole personal brand. And as a jiu-jitsu athlete, that's super important. So, is there anything that you're kind of like learning about as far as like creating this brand that you think would be beneficial for other athletes who are trying to also create personal brands, like on social media?
Right. So that's a great question, and my story is obviously going to be a little bit different than maybe your average, and I say that mostly because I started this brand from powerlifting. It started as like a powerlifting thing, and then it just kind of branched out into whatever I was doing. And so for me in particular, when I started this brand or team per se, it literally just started as a group of 20, 21-year-olds lifting at a local powerlifting gym in Arizona, and we're competing in competitions. So we just decided to put a name on it. And, with my creativity skills, How Strong was the best thing I could come up with at the time. We had shirts for it, and after a couple years, there's a decently high demand in the area for the shirts and everything. And after another couple years, it became relevant to me and brought to my attention like I should probably start like selling these and monetize my brand or my name. And initially, my thing was with that was I was going to keep it like Team How Strong, like keep it around like the team, kind of almost keep it not necessarily away from me, but have the focus be placed on the other individuals involved. And so, although I don't think that's a bad idea by any means, and I've seen countless brands succeed with that approach, I will say that I noticed a lot more growth for myself individually when I rebranded it and refocused it all around myself and what I was doing. And thankfully for me, I have a great team of co-owners between myself, my best friend Matt Olson, Irving Dominguez, and Jacob Hayes that all are very humble and have a lot of humility and what we acknowledge to be best for the business and the brand, which was inevitably to kind of make me the face and base the business around everything I'm doing. And now taking a step forward a couple of years, now we're able to obviously sell our merchandise, but also base our entire coaching business around that, where I have my clients and I'm able to now provide jobs to my friends to help me throughout that coaching business. And it's taken a couple turns I didn't really expect, but it's built into something that I never really anticipated to in a good way. Now trying to take that same brand that I built up the last few years with my individual pro wrestling career, trying to have the two coincide at some point to where my success allows for a fruitful life for myself, but also allows me to pave careers for my three best friends that have essentially supported me my whole life. That's really what I'm focused on. So my eventual goal, I like to think it's more short-term than long-term, but my short-term goal within this is to be able to grow myself so much individually naturally all that pays down into the brand, and that allows me to basically give my brand How Strong to my 3 best friends for them to have careers and pay and feed their families for generations to come. So I say this story because I think the biggest thing to keep in mind when you're starting your own personal brand is just to understand that you're going to have a general plan of what you want it to be or what you want it to even sell for that matter. And always be open to taking turns or switching things up or even adding or subtracting to what you currently have. I think if I had stuck with my original idea, would it have grown inevitably? But I do think that switching it up to where I refocus it on mostly myself, that's where I saw a lot of growth for the brand, which then helped me kind of achieve my original goal, which was to take care of my friends to begin with. So we kind of like had to make an initial self decision up front for myself to then be selfless in the matter of what I actually wanted to achieve within that. So, for a lot of jiu-jitsu people, I would definitely just advise be authentic. And I think, well, Gordon Ryan's an amazing example of that, authentic as you can be. But within that though, I do suggest that anyone else trying to create their own jiu-jitsu brand, try to hold a certain level of authenticity within themselves too. Don't necessarily just copy what Gordon's doing or Marigali's doing or anyone's doing for that matter. Like if talking shit isn't you, you don't necessarily have to make it you. I think you can really monetize whoever or whatever you are if you just kind of have the right business mindset around it. I can't necessarily give you that answer because I don't even know who I'm talking to, but what does that mean to you? And then formulate that into a business sense. That's my best advice, like in general terms.
Right, man, that makes a lot of sense. Again, so much to unpack there. Yeah, I was literally just listening to something. I think it was Rick Rubin. And my buddy sent me, he's like, if you like that video, you need to read his book. So now I'm on that. But he was just saying that anytime you create something, if it's for an audience, it's not art, it's for commerce. It's like you want to create something that you enjoy. And he's like, and through that, that's how you'll gain success. And that's just, what you're saying about authenticity. And man, it kind of like, it really, I've been kind of doing that because it's a battle when you start to create things. You're like torn between like, what does the audience want, and then what will make me happy, and you're trying to like find the balance. And then hearing him say that just reminded me is like, yeah, if I create something and I enjoy it, that should be the only thing that matters because you want your audience to be like you. So for me, it's kind of like just listening to that. Really, like I was like, so these ideas, trash. These ideas, the ones that you had over here, the ones that were for yourself. That's the real gold. And that's kind of why I've pushed far on jiu-jitsu and creating content, was because it was never about like creating content to be successful on YouTube. It was like I just had in my mind, well, I know I'm going to compete for forever, like until I cannot compete anymore. So it's like every tournament I go to, I just meet people and meet friends.
Yeah, that's really cool.
And
you meet a lot of fans.
Yeah, now I do.
Awesome.
So that's been pretty sweet. And it's like, well, jiu-jitsu will be forever, so why wouldn't I create content for it? And then the same thing with the podcast is like, I want to talk to people like you either way, with or without the cameras. I would want to have a conversation with you. So the podcast is just extra. But anyway, that's kind of when I came to the authenticity thing. And then when you're talking about the twists and turns, that's just how the universe works. Ain't it funny? It's like,
seriously,
you have an idea and then the universe makes you switch it up and make sure that you're able to adapt. And that's kind of like what this podcast is, an amalgamation of me moving to the left and right and trying to figure out how to go. We had a camera. I literally, you can ask her, I worked so hard for this camera, and I was like getting blood drawn. What is it? Getting plasma drawn. Like after training, I would train, go to another training session.
Damn.
I was like, man, this money is going to go directly towards this camera. Once I get this camera, I'm going to be able to record all my stuff. I'm going to be posting like crazy. And then what I realized is that the person, you have to have someone who is very knowledgeable of the camera behind it if you're going to be in front of it. And it just became this issue of like, the camera was out of focus, or the person that's like moving it doesn't know what to do with it. And then it just became this thing where I literally shot podcasts with my coach, and it was extremely difficult to get him on. I finally get him on, and then it was out of focus the whole time.
Really?
And I was in focus right before that. And so then I was like, no more cameras, all phones. The phones, you can hit record, and I know it'll be recording. The focus, I don't have to worry about lighting. I don't have to worry about focus. And it was just like, now I'm the guy with 2 iPads, 2 phones, and all this stuff.
Oh yeah, man.
but I can set it up anywhere at any time.
That's really cool.
Yeah. And also I had a camera guy too before that. And, then it's like, oh, I got a camera guy. I'm going to be super legit. But then trying to plan it with a camera guy and a third person and all of us meet up in the same place, all of us be where we need to be is like too much.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I don't like cameramen personally.
Yeah.
Just kidding. My camera brother is over there. That's why I said that. They're gonna clip that out.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, my editing guy was my camera guy. So
oh, really?
Yeah. I'm like, don't pay attention to that. But yeah, man. So I don't want to take too much of your time, but this is I try to keep this podcast to be a motivational podcast, and I try to give the audience as much advice because I know that a lot of my audience are jiu-jitsu guys or people striving to be better. And like the original idea of this podcast was a warrior podcast. Like I just wanted to interview other like-minded warriors. That was my original thing. And so obviously you're I would argue that you're at the pinnacle of, being what a man is and accomplishing things. So
Thank you.
What would be your piece of advice for someone who's looking to make a change in their life or maybe strive for the better? What would you say?
Well, that's a great question, and there's tons of ways to answer that. I would say the answer that I have that resonates with me more recently would just be being able to distinguish what doubt is within your mind and being able to have an actual strategy in place to bypass that or get over it or acknowledge it, but then actually use it to actually create some sort of a positive gain from it. We all go through doubt. And for me, for a long time, that was just the doubt of being able to verbalize my goals or vocalize my goals to my parents or my closest friends or the random guy at the gym that asked me what I'm doing today, that type of thing. I noticed shortly after I got over those fears and started owning my future visions and goals in front of anybody, I started to see a lot of things come to fruition for myself. Nowadays, I'm very confident in my ability to use words and manifest things for myself and my friends. So that's actually like something I almost delusionally call my own superpower. But even still to this day, I 100% face instances of doubt, of self-doubt in regards to, some of my bigger goals. It's like, what if, time's ticking, like you got to work harder, you got to keep working harder. Are you working hard enough? That type of thing. What if that big opportunity or break doesn't come? All those thoughts come through my head. And I think the biggest thing with that is that it's normal to have that doubt, but to be able to, as I talked about, be able to analyze it and like depict it and use it for something positive. And so for me, whenever I feel that, it really, truly, even though it sounds cheesy, just turns into fuel and motivation to continue to working towards the goal and take each day, one day at a time, before you know it, a year goes by and then look how far you come. So really, in regards to being a man or a formidable adult or anything, really, anybody that's goal chasing, you're going to have doubt. Be able to have a system around when doubt comes into your mind and then use it for something positive in your pursuit for better greatness. That's what I would say. And it is the general answer, but to me, it's very powerful because doubt could be a bunch of different things and it could come from a million different places. For me, it comes internally from the fear of not following through with my own word, not being able to create careers for my friends, not being able to be a superhero to millions of kids, not being able to be a formidable husband to a wife at some point, not being able to take care of my parents. These are the fears that kind of go through my head because I basically put my name down on this invisible contract that says my life is dedicated to this. And if I fall anywhere short, I am a failure. It's kind of crazy and it's kind of delusional, but at the same time, it's kind of that delusion that allows me to chase something so freely and believe that I can truly do it for myself. And anything can happen. I could not. But at the same time, I'm going to have full confidence that I put everything I have into this goal. So if I were to just die tomorrow, I die very happy and confident that I chased my goals with everything I had. That's my general mindset behind this. And I think that can do a lot for a lot of different people, regardless of whatever goal you have in life.
Yeah, dude, no, that was money. Being a coach, I've been coaching jiu-jitsu for like 10 years, martial arts anyway. And yeah, one of the number one things you figure out, and I've been in this, creative space too. So I've helped out non-athletes, like try to come up with podcasts and things like that. So I've also dealt with like a lot of creative coaching as well. And one of the number one things you realize is that everyone has this doubt. And a lot of the times the doubt will be the same amongst like multiple people.
Yeah.
So like one that I'll deal with consistently is age.
Mm-hmm.
The number of people's like, man, I think I'm too old or this, and that one strikes so home because I remember thinking the same thing when I started at like 20 or 21.
Right.
I was like, I always wish I just started sooner,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but the fear of age is imaginary. And I remember one of my first fights, and it was a good fight, but the dude just like fundamentally he didn't want to grapple or struggle me, but he kept taking me down. And he just like, as soon as we'd get to the grappling exchange, he let go, put me down again. And it was pancrase, so there were points.
Gotcha.
And anyway, I lost a match, and he was like, I want to say 29 or 30s. He was at least a decade older than me. And I remember being like, man, he's like, I brought something up about the age. I was just like, man, you're so much older than me. I figured you've been training for so long.
Right.
And he was like, dude, I'm actually terrified of you. He's like, I'm scared of the young guys. He's like, you're in a huge advantage right now.
Right.
You know, your body's young. And it just like, I remember him telling me that like I was afraid of him because he was older, but he said he was completely terrified of me because I was so young.
Right.
And, you know, just through the years, I met so many people with the exact same fear that they're too old. And it's like, again, that age thing is just this imaginary thing that we put on ourselves.
Yeah.
It's like, that time is going to pass by anyway. I had a cousin, one of my cousins, he joined the Marine Corps just like I did. And now I'm trying to convince him to do jiu-jitsu. And he was like, you don't think I'm too old? And he's only like 28 or something, 26, 20. I was like, dude, you could be 36 and be a black belt.
Yeah.
Like, dude, you won't even be at your max yet.
No.
You know, and I'll meet people and they'll be like, showing me pictures of them like 8 years ago. And like, that was me. And I'm 36 now, or I'm 37. And it's like, we're not even halfway, dog.
Right.
You're not even halfway.
Yeah.
You know, and I really think that, you know, not to keep sucking off Joe Rogan here, but man, he at 55, he could murder people. In a gym, he could show up and just be rolling and just murder everyone. And that's what I want. I want to be 50, 60. Man, I got to roll with Hugo Dort, who's a Core Belt legend, and he is still rolling.
That's awesome.
You know, he don't come after you. He kind of like lays in side control and lets you work from there. But man, if I could be 70s and still getting on the mats and passing information, that would be like that would be an unimaginable blessing.
That's
so
huge,
yeah, just back to what you're saying about doubt and how it can come in so many forms. You know, well, even with the creative thing, the number one creative block that I see that people will make up is this idea of whatever they imagine in their head has to be like what comes out.
Yeah.
And what I've learned is that you will never, whatever you're imagining in your head won't be what it is. And so you might as well just do it and let reality work out for itself.
Yeah.
And I'll be coaching people through this, and I'll still be doing that to myself.
Yeah.
You know, all my other ideas were like, oh, well, you know, how am I going to do it? I don't even know what to say or whatever. And then it occurs to me as like, quit planning out what you're going to say and just say it.
Yeah.
Because only by saying it and messing it up will you figure out where to adjust to the left and right. But yeah, I'll be working with people and trying to help them get their podcast started or whatever. And it's like, oh, well, you know, I want to do this and I want to do that. And it should be like this. And I'm like, buddy, we gotta make it one thing.
Yeah.
We gotta make it one thing and just do that. And then we can grow from there.
Right. Yeah. That's a good point.
But yeah, man, I'm really resonating a lot with what you say. So yeah, I'll ask you one more and then.
Yeah, no, I got all the time in the world, brother. You take your time.
I appreciate it. So man, kind of to go back, I'm like remembering questions that I wanted to ask you as I'm going through this whole thing. But is there anything that's like, I would say, so I guess your first skill set was weightlifting, right? That's like the first one you kind of like really.
So or just like lifting weights.
Well, you did karate too. So I guess you were doing martial arts and weightlifting simultaneously. Was there anything that you just like, that really sticks out to you as like a main attribute that applies across all skill set? Like you're like, man, this one thing that I learned here, I apply it to all these different things. Like this, one of my podcast ideas, one of my many failed podcasts was, I called it skills. And one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was like, jiu-jitsu guys who were masters at other things and then what they bring from the other skill set to jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
And like one guy, he was a chef. So he was the head chef. So he was in that like black belt role of like managing other chefs and he just like his success in chef, and he was a blue belt in jiu-jitsu, and he was just telling me like the correlations. And so that's kind of like what I'm really interested in talking about.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And honestly, I would say between all the things that I've done before, the main correlation to achieving any bit of success within those would just be your intellectual ability. And, you know, if you look at the best jiu-jitsu people in the past now, it's not that they can only be good at jiu-jitsu, is that they're choosing to be good or great at jiu-jitsu. If they wanted to do cooking or reading or writing, whatever, they'd be great at anything just because their intellectual abilities there. Like they've trained their mind to be able to receive and apply and comprehend information at a very high level. And so I guess for me in particular, I had some advantage early on in my life. You know, my dad was having me do like advanced math books and reading books and having me take IQ tests when I was like 4 or 5 years old because he's a psychologist, and my head was going through the ringer well before my body was. And I think that definitely helped train my brain a lot now to be able to dive into different things and be able to acquire skills maybe a little bit faster than your average person, just because from a young age, I was very well trained into being able to comprehend things the first or second try, and then B, always having my brain very alert and being very open to receiving information. So it's like the same skill being applied in different facets of athletics or what have you. So it's regardless of what you're doing within those, I think it's super important because the main correlation is your intellectual ability. Like, so always working on your mind. And whatever that means to you, I think there's a bunch of ways to do it. But like, if you strengthen your mind, you should be able to do a bunch of different things because your body will soon follow. That's how I see it, at least. Because when I do lifting, you know, lifting for the most part is definitely much more simple than jiu-jitsu, but there is a major technical aspect to it, especially once you start to get into heavier training and more experienced training. Even, you know, pro wrestling, there's a lot of things going on at the same time. You have the technique of the literal move, but then you also have the different aspects of the match that you have to simultaneously remember. Then you have jiu-jitsu where you have to remember 1,000 different options and pick the right one at the right time, and it tests your brain on a level that's very, very unique that most other things can't do. I have a couple of friends back home that are very good at jiu-jitsu that are also very oddly good at chess, or very, very oddly good at Bakugan, you know, weird shit. But it makes sense because even stuff like that has a sort of intellectual property that has to be worked on and maintained and such. So it's cool to see how that can apply through multiple fields. It's just a matter of like, where do you want to choose to use it?
Yeah, man. So intellectual ability, man, I like that. I don't think I've heard that one before. And yeah, I would also say that you see that a lot in bodybuilding, right? Because you can definitely be a meathead and just keep it simple, but then you meet these really intelligent guys who really know a lot about like the nutrition science and the more you get into it, the more you realize there is a lot to know.
Most definitely. And to that point, there's a lot of people out there that train really hard, but maybe don't have the full understanding of why they're as big or as strong as they are. But then there's the people that have a good combination of both. They're very big, very strong, but they have a very good intellectual understanding of why they're big and strong. And those are the people I tend to really gravitate towards because, you know, I've been lifting for so long now. It almost motivates me more, and it makes me feel like a beginner to be able to understand certain concepts at a much deeper level. Whereas I could continue going in the gym and doing bicep curls and stuff and like watch my arms get bigger over time, but that doesn't necessarily do it for me as much anymore. I really like understanding, you know, the different training principles that coincide with specific goals and how to attain certain things and so on and so forth. There's a huge rabbit hole, but I like that a lot. And I mean, talking about intellectuals, you know, we're here at Henzo Gracie Austin, so John Danaher teaches a good amount of the classes. If you ever want to come into a class and feel like a complete incompetent dumbass, make sure to come to one of John's classes, because you go to one of his classes and you just realize, one, how smart he actually is, but like it makes you like think like, damn, how smart is this guy? Like in its totality, like this guy is like such a intellectual. It's almost like scary, but it makes sense as to why he is able to remember all these moves and steps and sequences and have the answers to like every single little thing. It's very cool. It's also quite intimidating, but you know, look at somebody like him as to why he's known as the best coach in jiu-jitsu, because he's just probably one of the smartest people ever, or at least I've ever met, you know?
Yeah.
So it's cool.
Well, it's funny you brought that up. I was going to bring up Damian Anderson, who trained under John Danaher. And yeah, we went and did a private lesson with him, and he melted my brain in about 20 minutes.
Yeah. And I've heard some of his stuff too. He also obviously very much knows what he's doing.
Yeah, he trained under Gary Tonin and John Danaher in the beginning of his career. And I've taken one of John's classes. It was in the gi though, so I didn't. And it was like there was literally like 100 people in there, so I didn't get to really absorb a lot of the information. But yeah, just the way that they speak about jiu-jitsu. I'm kind of on the fence about whether to be using Japanese terms or not. It's funny how it's like we're supposed to be using, or we claim like from that school, they want us to use the Japanese terms, but also we use English with it as well. So it's not like they're exclusively speaking Japanese. It's like double outside ashi, or it's like, it's an amalgamation, which is kind of funny.
It's like Spanglish, but for Japanese.
No, but the way that they speak about jiu-jitsu, man, like I'm telling you, he was just like, so I did like a private / podcast with him, and just the way that everything turned out, it was only going to give me like a couple minutes of the private, and I didn't want to bother him too much. I was like, dude, I don't need to drill for an hour. Just kind of, show me some stuff. And we kind of worked it out to like, I was like, okay, well, I'm struggling with 50-50, and people are forcing this position on the 50-50, and that's when it kind of starts to break down for me. So what can you give me there? And man, he just like started to break down the position and really like the whys. And then even like in describing the movement itself, just like, he's like, this is a wedge, and this wedge is preventing them from doing this, and this is acting as a barrier to prevent from the grips, and just like his terminology. And then it was just like, it all made sense, because again, I'd only known Damien from the Instagram, and I was like, how is this guy so good? Like, what is it about him that makes him so good? And then it all made sense. I was like, oh, well, he's an intellectual who learned from one of the best in the world, John Danaher, and now he's able to formulate that in words.
Yeah, and I would say that if you had met any of John's successful students, I mean, Luke just won double gold at Worlds. I mean, just all of them, obviously, with their extreme dedication, but they have very much well absorbed John's system, and they have a lot of the same answers, like as readily available as John does. And it's crazy. And you ask, how does somebody become so good, or how does somebody that doesn't necessarily have a wrestling background or athletic background become one of the best in the world in jiu-jitsu? Well, you give them all the answers, and then they just master the study guide. And then you give them some grit and everything too, and then that helps. But like, these guys training at New Wave, I don't include myself in this group, but I'm honored to train with them. But just to be able to observe their application of their knowledge, and then also be able to hear them teach it, is truly one of a kind. If you ever have the opportunity to train with these guys, or do a private with them, or even talk to them at a tournament, like you will be very much pleased with what you probably come to find. They're also very nice people too.
I talk to Luke every now and then. I had a match against him. It lasted about
20. Oh, no way. Oh, that's awesome.
Lasted about 20 seconds.
You're part of his streak.
Yep. But it happened in the best way possible. It was at the ADCC Dallas Open, and I got a win first in the first round.
Nice.
In front of my parents, so that was cool.
There you go.
And then, when I saw I was going against Luke Griffith next, I was like, I just told my parents straight up, like, there's no chance of me winning this. If I survive a minute, it will be a goal in itself. So just to let y'all know. And competing with him, it literally felt like I was moving in molasses. Like I was just moving like slow, and he was moving in real time, where it's just like in a different dimension of speed.
He is so good. I thoroughly believe. I don't think they can set up the brackets this way, but I in my opinion, him and Nick are the two best under 99 for this upcoming bracket at ADCC.
You're talking Nick
Marigali.
Yeah, Marigali.
Yeah, so I just call him Nick because he's my friend.
You get to call him the cool name. Yeah. I'm like Nick.
Yeah, I know, right? But no, I firmly believe that they are the top two in the world, 100% at that weight class. Assuming Luke decides to go under 99, but and I also can confidently attest too, because I roll with these guys, and I've also rolled with a lot of the other ADCC competitors that are not under New Wave, and everyone's just amazing. But it's just you feel these guys, and you just literally cannot do anything. And if you can do something for a certain amount of time, then they break you, and then you just can't do anything even worse than what you thought to begin with, and it's not a good time. Just stay a hobbyist, bro. That's my best advice. Yeah. That's what I did.
That typical thing. that typical question is like, "Are you good?" And it's like, well, who's asking?
Right.
Is the real question.
Yeah, seriously.
There are people I could look like a baller on, and then there's people who make me look like I don't know anything. Dude, I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you. Everyone says nice things about you.
Means a lot. Thank you.
So I'm really glad I was able to get you on. And man, maybe we can do it again, maybe at the end of the year after some more pro wrestling matches. I'd love to hear about your journey. And thank you again for coming on, bro.
Thank you, my friend. I really appreciate it. That was awesome. Thank you.